Welcome to Energy Vista, a podcast on energy issues, personal and professional trajectories. A podcast where we make experts great again and contribute actively to the public debate on policymaking around commodities, geopolitics of energy, and trade. I'm your host, Leslie Palti-Guzman. It's February 6, 2026, and time for a new Energy Vista episode. Today, my guest is Bob McNally, founder and president of the Rapidan Energy Group, an energy market, policy, and geopolitical consulting firm. Bob is also the author of the award-winning book Crude Volatility. And actually, I have a copy with me,
Oh,
dedicated, with a dedicated. So from 2001 to 2023, Bob also served as a special assistant to President George W. Bush and served in the White House National Economic and National Security Councils. I'm very happy to have you back, Bob, on the podcast. I think it's the second time. And for people who don't know, I worked also at the Rapidan Energy Group and worked with you, and you were my boss for a few years. I'm very happy I had this experience because I grew enormously as an analyst. So welcome back, Bob.
Leslie, thank you so much for having me back on your excellent podcast. And greetings from London. And it's really great to be with you. There's a lot to talk about, and I can't think of a better place or person to go over things with than you. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And you've been on the road, so I'm even more, grateful that you make the time for this discussion. And so, oil is still making the headlines. It remains a dominant source of global primary energy. We watched the Venezuela surgical operation from the US military, and the decision from the Trump administration to remove the autocrat, Nicolas Maduro. And following that, we heard a lot of statements about what it means for oil, and notably that potentially the US combined with Venezuela could hold over 55% of the world's proven oil reserve. And since then, we've seen that the US has started importing Venezuelan oil and also selling Venezuelan oil. So many things have been said and analyzed about the motivation of removing Nicolas Maduro from power and bringing him to a jail in New York. But for you, like when it comes to the oil picture, do you think that part of the motivation was this return of great power rivalry? And who is controlling oil reserves, the trade flows? Also this competition between China and the US. Can you tell us a little bit, where does it fit in this oil landscape?
Sure. No, absolutely. Well, I think the first thing we should say is that, presidents have issues that they want to deal with, they choose priorities, and then there are issues or problems they are forced to deal with. They didn't choose it. Venezuela would be in the first category. President Trump, even in the first term, really wanted to bring Venezuela back into alignment with the U.S., and he's acting on it in the second term. And I think what we saw in Venezuela fits very well into this national security strategy that the president announced shortly before the Venezuela operation. And that boils down to saying the United States is not going to pull up stakes and abandon Europe and the Middle East and Asia. No. But we are going to prioritize this hemisphere. And we are going to prioritize ejecting adversaries
Like
that
China.
have not just, it's not so much colonies anymore, but significant economic and military and strategic stakes. And Venezuela was the first example and the biggest example. And so part of it is ejecting China and Russia and Iran from Venezuela. And also it is getting U.S. companies back into the oil sector. And it's also about immigration and drugs and so forth. So there's a lot of things going on, but it's really the first major concrete and forceful application of what people call now the Don Roe doctrine, right?
Yeah.
And so now from an oil perspective, Leslie, I think it's pretty minor. Um, it's a bad day for Chinese refiners who are expecting to get cheap Venezuelan crude, right? It's bad for the Chinese government that has lent so much money to China, and that was repayment for that. It's good news for other complex refiners who are going to have an opportunity to purchase those Venezuelan barrels, including US refiners, but not just us. But that's, in the grand scheme of things, not too big of a deal. The real
Yeah.
question is, can Venezuela increase its production? If so, how fast? And there, it's probably a matter of a few 100,000 barrels a day in the coming years. Again, not in a 100 million barrel a day market, plus not a huge deal. The real question is, in the 2030s and beyond, can Venezuela go from 1 million barrels a day back to 3 to 4 million barrels a day? That's a fascinating question, but it's a question that we won't even begin to see resolved until
Yeah.
well after the Trump administration has left, and a lot of things have to change before that can happen.
Mhm. So where are we in the boom and bust cycle? For you, like, are we? Is there a perception of shortage of oil to power the, the AI race, the AI race for leadership between China and the US, and all this power hungry industry that will requires more energy, electricity, and the sense of like the new need for energy security, and who is going to control those resources? Like, do you see it as playing out also in Venezuela, or not at all?
I think this, and I'm just been back. I was in Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, and Kuwait until this morning, and I'll be here in London for IE week. So lots of discussions with folks. I think you ask a great question. Where does all this sit in the cycles of oil? And we're going through a really interesting time, in my view. The oil market entered a bear cycle, low oil prices, in late 2014, 2015. And we were starting to climb out of it when COVID hit and we had an exogenous black swan demand shock. Then we had the Russian invasion of Ukraine and oil prices spiked and that hurt demand. But if we look beyond these cyclical factors, the big change is happening that people are talking about uh, everywhere. It's this narrative shift that for the last 5 or 6 years, the dominant narrative in the oil market and to some degree gas market has been that the world is on track for peak demand by 2030, which is very fast. And this was due to climate change policies and fuel efficiency gains and so forth. And this, everybody believed this and they invested that way. If you look around, oil discoveries are low, investment and spending on new discoveries is at a post World War II low. We are not investing enough for a world in which demand for oil and gas continues to grow after 2030. We're investing for a world that's going to see a peak, at least until recently. But that narrative is collapsing, Leslie. And you and I worked on this a lot when you were with us. And I know you think about these things. You come from Europe. Around the world, climate change policies are weakening from China to Europe to UK to Canada to the US. And the data don't show any collapse in OECD gasoline demand, for example, which we should be seeing if we're on track for a peak global liquids demand by 2030. And the political changes, you see this in Europe, certainly in the United States, are no longer prioritizing swift decarbonization, to put it lightly. Energy security, energy affordability are back. So when you stitch this all together, you have a market, an investment community that has been duped into believing that oil is about to go the way of horses and buggies 120 years ago, about to die in terms of growth, to suddenly realizing we don't have enough in 2032 or 2035. This is where Venezuela becomes important. We may need that extra 2 million barrels a day, especially since decline rates are increasing, as the IEA has pointed out. And so when I was traveling around, what you see now is countries are starting to get excited about investment again. Kuwait just announced that they're going to invite companies to come in and try and increase their crude production. Um, I think they're looking at this in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and UAE, certainly. So I think there's a sense that after this period of depression, if you will, about not only the current market, but where we're going, that suddenly we realize we are short. If shale is going to plateau, where is the oil going to come from if
I was
world
going to
demand grows? Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about US shale.
Yeah.
What does it say about the US shale oil and gas reserves and the ability to continue to produce and reach global markets? Are you concerned that? So, what does it mean to plateau? Does it mean that there is going to be a risk for lower exports in the medium term from US shale oil and gas?
I think we'll still be exporting a lot on the oil side, mainly because of quality issues. We produce the shale as light sweet that tends to get exported. Our refiners tend to like medium and then heavier barrels. Uh, and I think our consumption in the United States is not going to grow by gangbusters. Again, for the peak demand narrative, U.S. oil demand has to fall. Gasoline demand has to fall. That's not going to happen. But I think we're sort of steady. On gas, the concern I have, and this is you're the expert on gas and LNG, but with this whole data center debate and high Henry Hub prices, I'm concerned that we could see export restrictions down the road. Certainly, if the Democratic Party comes back and says, "Wow, we want to do what Donald Trump did." Donald Trump was very aggressive in his use of presidential powers. With a stroke of a pen, he can tariff, he can restrict exports and so forth. So one could not rule out that a new administration declares a climate emergency and restricts exports. And if we have gas at $8 or $9, $10 per MMBTU, and with the data centers building and so forth, people may say, you know what, we should block our exports of LNG and keep the gas here for homeowners, for businesses, for petrochemicals. So I think we may be testing America's political support for energy exports. Maybe not so much for oil, but certainly for gas in the years to come. So that's a big concern. I think if we limit our exports, it'll be because of above ground political risks, not economic ones.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think you hear this concern, this fear from Europe. They have recently vented a lot their anxiety about the reliability of US LNG and the US as a trade partner. I think for gas supply and exports, there is a case to make that higher Henry Hub prices could actually trigger production of dry gas from the US. Then it's
Mm-hmm.
another story whether it can reach markets or not and how fast. But there is still plenty of an abundant gas supply in the US. And then for the data center, there is a lot of debate about productivity and whether it's overblown, this kind of
Right.
demand for gas, and how fast nuclear can be built or additional renewable and co-location of power and those data center. And so a lot of it, it's a fascinating unfolding story. But I think I'm more optimistic that actually this administration is very supportive in statements and in actions about unleashing gas exports with accelerating the permitting process. Um, all the trade deals almost have a component of higher exports of gas abroad. So I think it's really part of the policy now. True that if Democrats come back to power, there would be a potential shift again towards more renewable and trying to decarbonize the world and so on. But I think they may have also understood what happened, in the past few years and realized that, for the Democrats, US LNG was also a part of the helping allies and
Right.
Europe with Ukraine. And, that's still part of the agenda, like how you can use it as a diplomatic tool. So, it's a fascinating debate.
Right.
But I wanted to ask you also about the US shale gas. So do you think that US shale oil and gas, so, the US has been using it as a tool, right? In diplomacy, in trade. Where do you stand in the debate on whether the US is a reliable trade partner? Do you think we've seen a weaponization, or we could see a weaponization of oil?
Well, when it comes to this administration and U.S. exports of energy, I think we're seen as and we are acting as a reliable trade partner. We don't see President Trump doing what President Biden did and calling a pause on permitting of liquefaction facilities, partly for climate change, partly for affordability issues, is what President Biden said. And so you're safe there. Now, as we see with Canada, although the president decided to exempt energy from the Canadian tariffs, I think there's a little more concern there, but I think energy is probably safe, more or less. Where the administration is willing to use and exploit or leverage energy for foreign policy, we see in Venezuela, in Iran, and with Russia, and we see that with what the administration did vis-a-vis Venezuela. We put a blockade in effect. We'll see with Iran, where we have sanctions, and we're trying to tighten those, and we may see restrictions on Iranian exports. And then with Russia, we see sanctions on big Russian energy companies, urging the Indians to take less Russian, and they've been reducing their imports, trying to get that euro spread wide. So we're certainly, the administration, when it comes to global trade for energy and energy exports by our adversaries, he's certainly willing to weaponize U.S. policy to further our goals. Definitely.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier, like the role of oil and gas companies and the growing role of the government also in trying to use them as a tool in diplomacy. And this is kind of what we saw also with Venezuela. How do you think the U.S. private companies react to this kind of growing federal governmental involvement?
Yet cautiously, especially the big integrated companies. They don't like to get swept up into political agendas. Often they can be counterproductive and destroy capital. And even if they are momentarily beneficial, politics in Washington is like the weather. If you don't like it, you wait a little while and it changes. And so, I'm sure companies looking at Venezuela, for example, are concerned about whether a President Newsom or AOC or somebody would have their back if they jumped into Venezuela in 2029 and so forth. So if you're a company that's operating in a country, I mean, I'm sure I think companies are thrilled that they have an administration that's supportive. Right.
Yeah,
so that there was an avoided cost. They dodged a bullet in the last election, and they're thrilled that they have an administration that is supportive of them in every way
I
it can
mean,
be.
for no oil and gas company want to be in Europe right now, and they are moving out of Europe. So
Right.
I
Right.
mean, they are much more
So
welcome in the US for sure.
that's right. And
Yeah.
so they love that. But you know what? 3 more years to go, and oil companies have a long memory and they have a long horizon for their investments, and they have to worry about making returns, as you know, in 2030, 2035, when the political situation could change enormously. So I think they're cautious about getting swept up into political agendas of the day.
Yeah. And at the same time, we see that they have to rival with state-owned entities and governments that have a much more aligned national energy strategies with their state-owned companies, and to open new market and we see that some of them are not shy of doing government-to-government deals. Do you think we're back at a place where the US is wondering, well, how do we compete with those actors and countries if ourselves were more dispersed and don't have a single energy strategy with like one entity that follows the lines? And at the same time, it's the strength of the US to have like this diversity, capital-driven companies. It drives competition and new technologies and innovation. So it's going to be interesting, I think.
It will, but I think the companies are positive, even though they're up against, in some ways, national oil companies. The big cloud over them has been this idea that the end is near for oil and gas demand. And they were vilified. They were made to be kind of the enemy by the political system. They were seen as doing a bad thing for society, providing energy. And we were in a soft phase in oil prices. They've been low. There's been oversupply, et cetera. So all these conditions have been a huge cloud over the industry. I think that cloud is lifting, and the political situation's improving. The future is looking better, as we discussed. And in that environment, I think the private companies are very confident that they can compete, that they have the capital, the expertise, even to work with the national oil companies. I mean, look, Kuwait has a national oil company, but it's going to ask foreign companies to come in and with production sharing agreements help them produce more because those private companies, they bring that skill, that capital, that flexibility. And so I see more partnerships with NOC countries in the reserves. And there's other areas. There's your Guyanas, there's your Argentinas, there's your offshore provinces where they have to compete. So I think the future is brightening for oil and gas companies. These big clouds are lifting, and I don't think they're too worried about having to operate in a market with their NOC brethren.
Okay, great. So we cannot not talk about Iran.
Okay.
um, there might be a strike. We don't know exactly what form, shape, timing. Do you think it's another opportunity to reconfigure at one point trade flow of oil and gas, and Iran has plenty of them? Um, how should we think about Iran and the different scenarios for the market?
Well, I think Iran is a place where both for energy and for broader geopolitics, uh, it's going to get a lot worse, but then it's going to get a lot better. Um, this regime in Iran is not supported by its people, and it's, in my view, decaying, and it's isolated, and it's on the ropes, and it's only a matter of time before the Iranian people overthrow it. But between now and then, there's a very real risk of a regional conflict and a very disruptive one for energy. And that's something certainly that's going on right now. So we have, Leslie, at Rapidan, we put odds and outcomes and things. And so we have a 75% probability that in the coming weeks, there will be some sort of military action between the United States and Iran, possibly likely Israel as well. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean a regional war where there's a massive disruption to Ras Laffan and Hormuz flows and Abqaiq. It could be selective, minor, but we do think that there's not a deal space between this regime and the United States and Israel. We just don't see both parties having enough common ground and certainly the trust to come to a deal. And so things will probably have to get worse. I hope they don't, but we think the odds favor that they will. However, to your point, Iran has the most, pro-American,
I was going to say,
pro-Western after Israel in the Middle East. It's Iran, and as you mentioned, was it second or so largest gas reserves, oil top five, infrastructure right there. And so when Iran has a regime that is like its people and comes back into alignment with the world, Leslie, so many things get better. First of all, we'll get production. You talk about Venezuela. We can get a lot more oil sooner in Iran if they opened up to Western companies, in my view. It's not the heavy oil, the Orinoco Belt, and all that. It's complex and everything, but they've maintained their fields well. We could really see, I think, faster production, oil and gas. You'd reduce geopolitical risk throughout the whole region.
yeah.
And bad news for Russia, you could probably you could build pipelines and extract oil and gas from the stands, from other countries in Central Asia, through Iran, through the Gulf at lower geopolitical risk. So I can think of it's hard to imagine, in my view, a more plausible and beneficial change in government than Iran's, where it, in one stroke, vastly improves the energy picture in the world, the geopolitical picture in the world, really. So I guess I try and keep myself optimistic about that, but very sanguine and very focused on, the getting from here to there may be quite bumpy.
Yeah. So over the summer, just before the 12 days war, I was saying that it was, potentially the best moment to attack the nuclear facilities in Iran because the oil price were relatively low. And here again, we are in the $60 per barrel. And all the worries over the summer about escalation and what it would do to the oil prices were proven wrong. I mean, it didn't last very long, the spike. Do you see a scenario where, again, this time, all the worries from the neighbors could be exaggerated, and at the end of the day, Iran is not that strong anymore, has weakened a lot, and the retaliations may not be, as horrific as anticipated, and that the reaction to the oil markets would be actually not, won't last.
Right. No, you're right. Since 2019, when Iran attacked Abqaiq, and we had the largest open increase in oil prices on the Sunday Asian Open ever, but it quickly reversed. And Russia attacked Ukraine. Crude went from $80 to $120, quickly reversed. You mentioned the June war spiked, reversed. President sanctioned Russia in October, spiked, reversed. So the market has learned that there can be geopolitical events, but if there's no sustained interruption in oil or gas flows, there's no sustained oil price spike. Now, with Iran, our odds are 75% we will see military action. We're not that high that there will be a sustained major disruption of energy. That would be more in the 15, 20% category. But if that happens, it would be enormous. Iran's ability to damage Gulf energy production and restrict flows is greater than I think traders believe, especially after all these years of nothing happening, right?
Yeah,
I remind people.
I remember in the past, like each time there is tensions with Iran, we hear, okay, if they close the Strait of Hormuz, it will last only 3 days, because then the U.S. military will move in and they
Right.
don't have the capacity to withhold that for much longer. Is that still the case?
I think that's wrong.
Oh.
We've never believed that. We've done studies. We've done elaborate studies. We've worked with military officers, retired military officers who've helped us understand that. No. That is a misconception. Just because the past military actions, first Gulf War, second Gulf War, praying mantis when the United States and Iran came to blows in the late 1980s and we sank a good chunk of their navy in an afternoon. The memory may be the U.S. wins overwhelmingly in hours to days. But no, military officers who've looked at this, British, American, that I know, they say this is different. Iran has the weaponry, the coastline to be able to make Hormuz unsafe for commercial traffic for weeks, if not longer. Consider this, Leslie. Last April, the United States military spent 52 days pummeling the Houthis in Yemen.
Yeah.
We failed to get them to open up the Bab el-Mandab. President Trump publicly congratulated the Houthis on their resilience. We spent $1 billion, 1,000 munition strike points. Iran has much better weaponry and much better terrain to operate from. So in my view, if Iran chose to contest with the U.S. The Hormuz Strait, and if it chose to go back and attack major facilities like Abqaiq, it could do so, and it could threaten Hormuz for much longer than the market is aware of, or let's say is expecting. They will expect it'll be over by 3 days. I don't think it's going to be over by 3 days.
Yeah. So the hope is that Iran has been infiltrated enough by Mossad agent or people that have turned against the mullah and the ayatollah, and will help from inside to also dismantle the regime.
That's right. Yeah, this ends with a good story. Iran is eventually going to have a government like its people. People are enormously powerful and resilient and entrepreneurial. They're wonderful. And eventually that regime will fall. The question is, can we get to that day without having to have a conflict in the region as it goes down?
Mm-hmm. Well, on those notes, and I really hope also that, the Iranian people, as you mentioned, and the women that have been so courageous, get, the freedom they deserve. Right. And for Iran to become again a friendly nation to the US, to Israel, that would have transformations for the Middle East and all the alliances also between the countries.
Right.
So I wanted also to talk a little bit about what has kept you busy at a more personal and your professional trajectory, Bob. So you've always advocated for bipartisanships, but also for the reliability of data, oil data notably, and the fact that it should be depoliticized. And whether it's the EIA or the International Energy Agency, you've been very vocal at a personal level and have waded with your influence and in debates in DC and elsewhere. Do you feel your voice has been heard, and where are we in the debate about reliable data?
Well, it's an ongoing struggle, and the good thing is it's bipartisan. Democrat, Republicans, serious energy experts, policy participants, we all agree on a lot of things. And one is we should have ample, objective, timely, comprehensive data on the most important commodity in the world, oil and gas, hydrocarbons. And that's just a no-brainer. And so, we've had some successes. I was just, as I said, at the International Energy Forum meeting in Riyadh, where the IEA, Fatih Birol, the head of the IEA, was back there. And it was great to see him back there. He had not come for a few years. There was tension between the IEA, certainly OPEC, many experts, myself, because, for 5 years, the IEA had decided to not publish any scenario that showed oil and gas demand rising in the future. They only would forecast these peak scenarios, and they, in so doing, sort of helped this narrative get formed and this investment misallocation take place. But to its credit, the IEA last November resumed, normal, objective, conventional modeling, and they included these, what we call a reference case or a business as usual scenario that showed oil and gas demand increasing. You can have scenarios where there's tougher climate action and lower demand. That's fine, but you don't want to censor other scenarios, especially since, given the data we talked about earlier and the policy, it's quite clear that we're not decarbonizing as fast as everyone thought 4 or 5 years ago. So, look, the IEA corrected a mistake. That's good. They were back. Now we're having reasonable debates about many things, and those can be had. So I think we've made and I played a role in that, I think, a little bit, in raising concern, attention about the politicization of forecasts, especially from agencies that we rely on to help us navigate the future. Now then, there's the backward steps. The Trump administration decided to leave the IEF. I think that's very unfortunate. The IEF was all about better data, Jody, and so forth. I don't see the sense in that at all. I hope we'll correct that mistake and go back in there and work on that. I was very proud working for President Bush to help bring us into the International Energy Forum because of the importance of strong data. My friend Jason Bordoff, who had my job for President Obama, he's supportive of it. It's something that we all should agree on. So we have some wins, we have some setbacks, but the cause continues because at the end of the day, hydrocarbons are the lifeblood of modern civilization. And we all should agree that we should be able to count them, count what's going on as best we can, and do analysis based on objective data, reasonable assumptions, open minds, no political censorship, either direction. That's in our best interest, all of us.
Yeah. And I think it goes way beyond, the oil data. I think there is a tendency to have activists or ideologically driven people within institutions that are trying to, make their hopes become policy, right? And
Right.
and that unfortunately could lead to bias projections or
Right.
data.
It's costly too. Look at the write-downs that auto companies and oil companies are taking on their misplaced bets on quick EV penetration or getting out of oil into renewables. I won't name any names, but we could quickly find very well-known companies that are taking huge write-downs because they bet wrong on something that was really, I think, politically driven wishful thinking, not sound analysis. So forecasts have consequences. They're costly when they're politicized. I hope we've learned that lesson. I really do. Sometimes you have to learn lessons the hard way. You have to touch the hot stove, to learn it's not hot, to learn not to do that. So let's hope that we've learned that lesson.
Well, thank you so much, Bob, for coming to the podcast. And I wish you a safe trip. And we'll have you back soon, I hope. And depending on what's going on in Iran, I think we touch it on it, and we'll both discuss those fascinating elements in the near future, I think.
Leslie, thank you for having me on. Safe travels. Great job. Keep it going. This podcast is excellent. You're a great expert in your own right, and then you bring together great folks. And so keep it going. We need discussions like
Thank you.
this. So thank you very much. I'm honored that you have me on again.
Thank you. This podcast was recorded on February 6th, 2026. I have the minute. And this is Leslie Palti-Guzman saying good day and good luck. If you like what you hear, want to support Energy Vista, discuss sponsorship, or send feedback, contact me.